Welcome to the Hindu Daily.
Yes, jumping right in today.
We are diving straight into the editorial section today with a massive structural proposal that could completely change how you vote. It's the One Nation, One Election proposal, or ONOE.
Right, the ONOE.
Yeah, we're looking at the proposed Constitutional Amendment Bill 2024. This introduces Article 82A, which, if I'm getting this right, aims to synchronize the Lok Sabha and state assembly elections.
That's exactly it. And, I mean, on paper, the arguments for it sound incredibly logical.
Oh, totally. It promises to slash those massive election expenditures, stop the endless deployment of our security forces.
Which is a huge logistical strain.
Right. And it prevents the Model Code of Conduct from just constantly freezing administrative work.
But before we just nod along and accept all those administrative benefits, we have to look at the sources. They highlight a rather shocking real-world example from Indonesia.
Yeah, that part was intense.
They tried synchronized elections back in 2019, and the human cost was just staggering. We are talking about nearly 900 poll workers dying.
900.
Just from the logistics.
It's from sheer exhaustion. And thousands more fell ill trying to manage that colossal logistical nightmare. Then, over 100 more died in their 2024 elections.
Wow.
It got so bad that Indonesia's constitutional court actually mandated that national and local elections have to be separated starting in 2029.
Let's unpack this.
It's a profound cautionary tale, really. It forces you to weigh the idea of quote-unquote efficiency against human and democratic costs. When we impartially analyze the constitutional implications for India, we have to go right back to the Constituent Assembly.
To Dr. B.R. Ambedkar.
Exactly. He laid out a very clear philosophical choice. He argued that a democracy cannot simultaneously maximize both stability and responsibility. India deliberately chose continuous executive accountability over a guaranteed 5-year tenure.
Right, the idea that a government has to constantly prove it has the confidence of the House rather than just, locking the doors for 5 years and doing whatever they want. Exactly. And that brings us to the most controversial part of this ONOE proposal, which is the concept of unexpired term elections.
Explain how that works for us.
Well, let's say a state government falls and the assembly is dissolved prematurely. Under this new rule, the newly elected legislature wouldn't get a fresh 5 years. They would only serve whatever time is left on the original nationwide clock.
So if the previous government collapsed after 4 years, the new one only gets 1 year in power.
Precisely. It essentially creates a governance dead zone. Because if a new government knows they might only be in office for, say, 10 months, all incentive for long-term structural reform just vanishes.
That makes sense. It arguably devalues your franchise as a voter, too.
It does. And if we look impartially at the primary arguments for this, which is the financial cost historical data shows combined election spending usually hovers around just 0.03% of India's GDP.
Wait, 0.03%. That puts the entire financial argument into a completely different perspective. You really have to ask if upending the federal structure is justified to save a fraction of a percent of the GDP.
That is exactly the objective question being debated right now.
Speaking of GDP in massive numbers, the editorial section also covers Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney's recent visit to India.
Ah, yes.
This happened recently between February 27 and March 10, 2026. And the explicitly stated goal is just incredibly ambitious. They want to double bilateral trade to $70 billion by 2030 and officially relaunch negotiations for the Comprehensive Economic Partnership Agreement.
Or CEPA, yes.
Yeah.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, we're looking at a definitive shift away from the reactive, politically tense diplomacy we've seen in the past few years.
Moving strictly toward concrete commercial action.
Exactly. They're laying the groundwork for some very specific high-growth sectors.
Yeah.
Energy is really the anchor here. You already have that historic $2.6 billion, 9-year uranium supply agreement with Canada's Cameco.
Right. It's like a perfect puzzle fit. Canada is sitting on this mountain of critical minerals and clean baseload power, and India provides the massive scale and market certainty they need to sell it.
It's a highly complementary setup, and it is a two-way street. We are seeing major Indian tech firms like HCL expanding deeply into the Canadian innovation ecosystem.
And then you look at the capital flowing the other way.
Right. Canadian pension funds have already poured over $100 billion into Indian infrastructure and real estate.
That is massive.
It is. But, and this is crucial for you as an observer to remember, trade agreements like CEPA are really just paper. They only create the regulatory frameworks.
They don't actually sign the business deals.
Exactly. Governments don't generate market share. It is ultimately up to the private companies to seize that momentum, navigate the local markets, and actually build those joint ventures.
Okay, so from international trade frameworks, let's pivot to the domestic economy. Specifically, the unpaid labor that basically keeps our society functioning.
This is such a critical topic.
The opinion section dives into India's care economy. The Union Budget 2026-27 announced this plan to train 1.5 lakh multi-skilled caregivers in geriatric and core care, which sounds like a fantastic step forward, right?
It does sound great initially.
But the sources point out a glaring irony. What about the 5 million women, the ASHAs, the Anganwadi workers, the midday meal cooks, who are literally already running India's foundational health and childcare systems?
Right, the state currently classifies them as mere volunteers.
Or honorary workers, which completely excludes them from this new formal ecosystem.
That volunteer classification is the root of what economists call the care penalty. It essentially creates a massive, state-sanctioned shadow labor force.
The numbers on this are wild.
Incredibly stark. According to the 2024 Time Use Survey, Indian women spend 140 minutes daily on unpaid household caregiving.
And the men.
Men spend just 74 minutes.
That is almost double the time, every single day.
And the state effectively relies on those existing gender norms. They outsource essential, highly demanding public services to these women, but because they're classified as volunteers, the state doesn't have to offer formal contracts.
No minimum wage, no paid leave.
No maternity benefits either. However, the legal ground under this system is starting to shift. In 2025, the Supreme Court ruled in a highly significant case called Dharam Singh versus State of UP.
What did they decide in that case?
The court stated that work, which is recurrent and central to an institution's core functioning, cannot be treated as temporary indefinitely.
So you can't just call someone a volunteer forever if your whole system collapses without them.
Exactly. This provides a very strong legal foundation to argue that the state must transition those 5 million women from precarious honorariums to formal wages and permanent posts.
It's about time we recognize that labor. Sticking with the opinion section in healthcare, we really need to talk about the economic burden of cancer care.
Another massive domestic issue.
The recent budget fully exempted the basic customs duty on 17 cancer-related drugs. If you're wondering why this specific policy matters to you, consider that cancer incidence in India rose by 26.4% between 1990 and 2023.
That is a staggering increase.
And the financial shock of a diagnosis is just devastating. While an average hospital stay for a typical ailment costs around 20,135 rupees, a cancer patient spends over 61,000 rupees per visit.
And this introduces the cost multiplier problem, which contains a deeply suppressing nuance. We all expect private hospitals to be expensive.
Naturally.
But the relative financial burden is actually worsening significantly in the government sector.
Wait, government hospitals are getting relatively more expensive for cancer care. How does that work?
Back in 2014, cancer care in a public hospital cost about 4 times as much as a standard admission. By the latest data, that multiplier has jumped to 5 times the cost.
Wow.
And this disproportionately devastates the rural poor, where the multiplier climbs even higher, to 5.5 times.
Because they have to travel, stay in cities, lose daily wages.
Precisely. And when you actually break down those massive public hospital bills, the doctor fees are negligible. Medicines alone make up 40 to 50% of the total out-of-pocket expense.
Which explains the policy shift.
Yes, that is exactly why this new customs duty exemption on those 17 drugs isn't just a minor policy tweak. It is a vital, targeted intervention for you and millions of citizens, because it directly attacks the single largest driver of medical debt for the most vulnerable patients.
That makes a lot of sense. Now, while we're on the topic of systemic hurdles, let's look at the science section and the gender gap in STEM research. Here's where it gets really interesting. India actually has the highest percentage of female STEM graduates globally.
Which is a fantastic metric.
We're talking 43% at the bachelor's level and nearly 50% for master's and PhDs. In fact, recently, more girls cleared Class 12 science than arts.
So the early interest and the talent are undeniably there.
Exactly. But then you look at the professional data. Women make up only 18% of the country's actual research and development workforce.
It's a uniquely Indian version of the Leaky pipeline phenomenon. In many Western countries, you see the drop-off happening much earlier in high school or early college.
But in India,
The structural and social barriers hit like a brick wall right after the PhD.
right when they should be launching their prime research careers.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Just as these highly trained women are looking for faculty positions, They face immense societal pressure to settle down.
And that intersects with institutional rules.
Heavily. Combine that societal pressure with strict age cutoffs for entry-level government research jobs, geographic constraints that often tie them to where their husband works, and an incredibly rigid academic system.
An academic system that offers almost zero remote or hybrid research roles.
Right.
So if you can't move to the city where the lab is, you're just out of the game.
Yes, and it creates what researchers call the position gap. These brilliant, highly qualified women are systematically locked out of stable, tenured faculty positions.
So what happens to them?
Instead, they are forced into precarious, short-term contractual roles that rely entirely on unstable soft money grants. They do the heavy lifting in the labs, but without the job security or the leadership titles.
It's a massive loss of scientific potential for the whole country. Let's shift our focus globally for a moment. Looking at the text and context section, there was a major 6-3 ruling by the U.S. Supreme Court on February 20, 2026.
A very consequential ruling.
The court struck down the sweeping tariffs that President Trump had imposed on Canada, Mexico, and China. He had originally justified these massive taxes using a 1977 emergency law known as the International Emergency Economic Powers Act, or IEEPA.
Impartially speaking, this ruling is a textbook clarification of the separation of powers. The U.S. Constitution is very explicit. It grants Congress, not the president, the power to lay taxes and tariffs.
So he overstepped.
The Supreme Court effectively ruled that a president cannot use a 1970s Emergency Act as a loophole to unilaterally rewrite global trade policy.
But the tariffs didn't just vanish overnight, did they?
No, they didn't. The ruling didn't stop the administration's goals. It merely forced a change in legal tactics. The administration immediately turned around and implemented a 150-day temporary duty using an entirely different set of legislative workarounds.
What kind of workarounds?
Specifically Sections 122, 301, and 232 of various other trade acts.
So it's basically legal ping pong, but with billions of dollars on the line.
Tens of billions. The financial fallout is staggering. Around $180 billion was collected under those now invalidated IEPA tariffs.
$180 billion.
And currently, over 1,000 companies are suing the U.S. government in the Court of International Trade, demanding refunds for money they argue was taken unconstitutionally.
Wow. Okay, bringing it back to India, let's look at the financial reality of our own rapidly growing cities, also from the text and context section. Urban centers generate roughly 67% of India's GDP.
A huge majority.
Yet under the recommendations of the 16th Finance Commission for 2026 to 2031, urban local bodies are slated to receive about 3.56 lakh crore rupees. Now, 3.56 lakh crore sounds like a massive pile of money on paper.
But when you do the macroeconomic math, it is only about 0.13% of the projected GDP.
Which brings us to what analysts are calling the illusion of urban devolution.
Yes. If you're wondering why your local municipality can never seem to fix the potholes or manage the drainage, this 0.13% figure is the answer. India's urban population is projected to hit 600 million during this financial cycle.
So the math just doesn't add up.
When you distribute that 3.56 lakh crore across 600 million people over 5 years, the per capita transfers are completely stagnating.
So the pie looks big, but the slices are getting thinner.
Precisely. Furthermore, the actual autonomy of your city to spend that money is severely restricted by tied grants and rigid performance conditions.
Tied grants.
Yes. For instance, to unlock just 20% of their allocated funds, cities are now being forced to raise 1,200 rupees per household through property taxes and user charges.
So the federal government is effectively forcing local councils to hike your property taxes just to get their own grant money.
Yes. And there are deep federal concerns here, too. The Commission is financially incentivizing the merging of smaller, peri-urban villages into larger city limits simply to boost the municipal tax base.
But isn't urban development a state issue?
It is. Urban development is constitutionally a state subject. Critics argue that using federal financial pressure to force these messy municipal mergers ignores state-level constitutional rights and is going to create immense administrative chaos on the ground.
It's all connected. Let's pivot to something completely different, but honestly just as chaotic. Have you noticed a bizarre trend on your digital feeds lately? We're talking about AI animal slop.
Oh, this is a very strange development.
If you scroll through Instagram, TikTok, or X, you've definitely seen these hyper-realistic AI-generated videos. Gorillas smashing tigers with boulders, or guys taking casual underwater selfies with great white sharks. They are totally fake, churned out by generative AI purely for cheap virality because social media algorithms aggressively aggressively reward this kind of low-effort sensational content.
What's fascinating here is the actual tangible danger this poses. It is so easy to just dismiss it as silly, harmless entertainment.
But it's not.
No, a 2025 report in the journal Conservation Biology argues otherwise. These videos are actively warping public perception. They promote highly dangerous anthropomorphism, meaning they make children and even adults think that wild apex predators are friendly, thinking creatures you can approach.
Right, it turns a wild bear into a cartoon character in people's minds.
Exactly. They also make owning exotic pets look highly attractive and manageable, which directly encourages illegal wildlife trafficking. And we have to consider the nuanced perspective of organizations like WWF India.
They use AI too, right?
They are very clear that AI itself isn't the enemy. They actually use AI extensively to sort through thousands of remote camera trap images in minutes. It's an incredible conservation tool.
But the fake content is the problem.
They warn that these fake entertainment videos manipulate the public's basic understanding of ecology. Alarmingly, it can even incite retaliatory violence against real wild animals when those animals act according to their actual nature rather than the cuddly AI-generated personas people saw on TikTok.
That is a wild, unintended consequence of technology. Let's move into the business section, where we have another clash between tech ambition and reality. We need to talk about the massive gridlock in India's booming renewable energy sector.
The operational bottlenecks.
Right. We hear all the time that our solar capacity targets are being met, but there is a severe bottleneck. Let's take Rajasthan. They have about 23 gigawatts of commissioned renewable capacity right now, but their grid evacuation margin, basically the amount of power the cables can actually carry away, is only 18.9 gigawatts.
Oh, there's a deficit.
A huge one. That means over 4,000 megawatts of perfectly good, clean energy is just stranded and shut down during peak solar hours.
It is incredibly frustrating for developers because the burden of this curtailment isn't shared equally. Imagine you have a VIP ticket to a concert. You show up on time, and the venue just locks the doors on you specifically.
That's a great analogy.
That is what's happening to energy projects holding temporary general network access, or key GNA. They face 100% shutdowns to balance the grid, effectively punishing the developers who followed every rule, met their timelines, and secured their clearances.
But why is the grid so constrained? Aren't we building new transmission lines?
We are, and that's the irony. We have state-of-the-art 5,000 crore rupee transmission corridors specifically designed to handle massive loads. Yet they're routinely operating at less than 20% capacity because the national grid operator, Grid India, is operating out of extreme conservatism regarding grid stability.
So they're artificially capping the traffic just to be overly safe.
Yes. While grid security is undeniably vital, our business sources argue these public institutions must be held accountable for maximizing asset utilization. Right now, the system allows the operators to avoid risk entirely, making the developers and ultimately you, the end consumer, bear the heavy financial cost of all that stranded, wasted clean power.
It's like building a 10-lane highway and only letting 2 cars drive on it. Okay, for our spotlight section today, I want to take you away from the macroeconomics and ground this in a very human reality at Balswa Dairy in Northwest Delhi.
This is a very grounding story.
Picture this. Nargis B and Rahman B, 2 women in their 60s, sitting under a blue tarpaulin. Every single day, for 10 hours a day, they manually sort through 50 kilograms of mixed, sour-smelling household waste.
By hand.
Yes, they do this without gloves, without masks, separating jagged plastics and toxic wet waste by hand, all to earn just 300 rupees a day. They are part of Delhi's massive, invisible army of waste pickers.
And their daily reality is the result of a profound systemic failure. Delhi generates over 12,407 tons of waste every single day. The municipality simply cannot handle it.
The scale is unimaginable.
It is an estimated 1.5 lakh informal workers like Nargis who manually divert about 2,000 tons of recyclables away from those overflowing toxic landfills. By doing so, they are saving the city an estimated 1 crore rupees every single day.
1 crore rupees daily, saved by people earning 300 rupees a day.
Exactly. Because households and businesses largely fail to segregate their waste at the source, the entire toxic burden is pushed onto these informal workers. The occupational hazards are devastating.
I can only imagine.
Chronic respiratory illnesses, severe skin infections, cuts from medical waste. The toll is so severe that the average life expectancy for a waste picker in India is tragically reduced to around 39 years.
39 years. That is heartbreaking. Hasn't the government introduced schemes to help them?
They did introduce the Namaste scheme, which is intended to provide ID cards, PPE kits, and basic health coverage. But the rollout has been painfully slow and bureaucratic.
So it's not reaching them.
No. The vast majority of these workers, including Nargis and Rahiman, remain completely unaware of the scheme and entirely unprotected, essentially subsidizing the city's cleanliness with their own lifespans.
We conclude our deep dive into today's sources with another story from the Spotlight section, but this one is a powerful narrative of political agency. Meet R. Shirokala.
The Panchayat president.
Yes, she is a 22-year-old engineering graduate who recently became a Panchayat president. For 30 years, a marginalized settlement in her area was completely isolated by a river. Previous leaders ignored them. She utilized her newly won position to finally build a bridge and connect them.
A physical bridge to opportunity.
Exactly. It is exactly the kind of grassroots transformative leadership that was envisioned when the 73rd and 74th constitutional amendments mandated a 33% reservation for women in local governance.
Her success powerfully breaks the deeply ingrained cynical myth that female representatives are merely proxies or silent placeholders for the men in their families. But while we celebrate that agency, we must also analyze the severe, often violent pushback these women face when they actually assert their authority.
Right, because upsetting the local power structure is incredibly dangerous.
It is. Leaders like T. Panchavarnam face constant administrative hurdles and harassment simply for refusing to participate in entrenched local corruption. And the caste-gender dynamics are brutally severe, particularly for Dalit women.
The sources mention a specific case from 2011.
Yes, the horrific attack on Krishna Veni, a Dalit Panchayat president who was viciously attacked simply because she tried to build public toilets for women in her village.
That is horrifying.
She survived, and she fought a grueling 13-year legal battle against the dominant caste men who attacked her. Finally, in 2024, she saw her attackers sentenced to double life imprisonment. To combat the systemic violence and administrative resistance, organizations like the Tamil Nadu Women Panchayat Presidents Federation have formed.
So, what does this all mean?
It means that through collective bargaining and mutual support, these women are bypassing the corrupt local middlemen and connecting directly with top political figures. The narrative is decisively shifting from symbolic, token representation to active, informed power. Marginalized voices are finally forcefully asserting their constitutional rights against traditional, oppressive hierarchies.
Think about how much of our modern world, from the recycling of our daily waste in Delaware to the unpaid care of our children to the very fabric of our local democracies, is held up by the invisible, uncredited, and precarious labor of women in marginalized communities. What would happen to our economy and our society if this shadow workforce simply stopped working tomorrow?
Thank you for listening. If you want to provide suggestions, please contact on the Twitter handle given in the episode description.
As always, we are eager to hear what our listeners want to be informed about. We wish you a great day.